It was supposed to be the happiest time of her life, but instead she stood trembling in a quiet bedroom, tears streaking down her face, her arms covered in bruises. One hand clutched her stomach, protecting the life inside her, while the other shook uncontrollably. Suddenly, the door burst open. He froze. His heart stopped. The woman he loved, broken, terrified, staring back at him as if begging for help. Pause. Voice drops lower. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Who did this to you?" But before she could answer, her eyes shifted past him toward the doorway, where a shadow slowly crept into view. And from that moment on, nothing in their lives would ever be the same. From the outside, the Carrington estate looked like perfection. Gleaming windows, stone columns, and gardens manicured so precisely they could have been lifted from a magazine spread. For Michael Carrington, it was supposed to be more than just a house. It was his proof. Proof that the boy who once grew up in a cramped two-room apartment had finally conquered life. But that evening, as he eased open the door, something felt wrong. The air was still heavy. The usual sounds, faint jazz from the living room, Layla humming while she tidied the nursery, were gone. In their place came silence thick enough to press on his ears. Michael dropped his briefcase onto the oak floor, the thud echoing down the hallway. He loosened his tie, shoulders tight from a day of boardrooms and numbers. For once, he was home earlier than usual. He thought he'd surprise Layla with dinner, sit with her, and feel the baby's first strong kicks together. Instead, his eyes caught something strange. A silk scarf, violet with delicate embroidery, lay draped over the arm of a chair. But it wasn't resting. It was twisted, clenched, as if someone had gripped it until their knuckles turned white. He lifted it, and the faint scent of jasmine and vanilla drifted to him, the smell that always clung to Layla. He smiled reflexively, then frowned. "Layla?" he called softly. No answer. He followed the faintest sound, something broken and muffled. Down the hall, the nursery door was cracked. He pushed it open and froze. Layla sat on the floor, her back against the unfinished crib, her hand curved protectively across her stomach. Her other hand covered her mouth, but the sobs broke through anyway. "Layla," Michael's voice cracked. She turned sharply, brushing her tears, trying to compose herself. But the smudged makeup couldn't hide the faint blue shadow along her jaw, a bruise. His chest tightened. He crouched, reaching for her hand. She let him hold it, but her fingers stayed rigid, trembling. "I fell," she whispered. "Don't worry." Just clumsy again, but her words were brittle, rehearsed. And the scarf clenched in his other hand told him more than she ever would. Outside the open nursery window, two maids whispered while carrying linens across the garden. Their voices drifted in, sharp as glass. "Poor madam. She doesn't laugh like she used to." "Hush. If his mother hears, we'll all be in trouble." The words stabbed Michael. His throat tightened, but he stayed kneeling, brushing Layla's hair back gently. She avoided his eyes. That night, as she finally drifted into a fragile sleep, Michael sat beside her, staring at the ceiling. A red light blinked faintly in the corner of the room, the hidden cameras he had installed months ago for security. He had never paid much attention to them until now, and for the first time, a terrifying thought struck him. The danger wasn't outside their gates. It was already inside. The following morning, Michael left the house before dawn, but not for work. His chauffeur waited outside as usual, expecting to drive him to the Carrington Group headquarters. Instead, Michael waved him off, climbed into his own car, and went to a small office he rarely visited, his private security hub. It was a sterile place, tucked into the back of an old commercial building. Inside, rows of monitors glowed dimly, each one linked to the hidden cameras in his mansion. At first, Michael had justified the surveillance as a way to protect Layla, their unborn child, and their property. But lately, guilt had crept in, because protection had turned into obsession. Now, staring at the screens, that guilt burned hotter. He pulled up the feed from the nursery. He clicked back to the night before. There she was, Layla, alone, crumpling to the floor with her hand over her stomach. He watched her cry silently for nearly 10 minutes, before she forced herself up, wiped her face, and tried to rehearse the words she'd later tell him. "I fell." Don't worry. But that wasn't the part that froze him. Rewinding further, he saw the door open. A figure stepped inside. Not an intruder, not a stranger. It was someone he knew, someone who lived under his roof. Margaret, his mother. Michael leaned closer, his throat closing. The footage showed Margaret walking into the nursery with a tray. She set down tea, smiled coldly, and began talking. No audio played. The cameras only captured visuals. But the tension was unmistakable. Margaret leaned close, her voice sharp. Layla's shoulders curled inward, her eyes wide, lips trembling. Then Margaret's hand shot out, gripping Layla's chin. She forced Layla's face up, her fingers digging into soft skin. Layla flinched, tears streaming. Margaret finally released her, shoving her back against the crib. The tray rattled. Tea spilled. Michael's hands shook on the desk. He wanted to scream, to punch through the glass, to storm into that mansion and drag his mother out. But the image before him left him paralyzed. The woman who had raised him, who had worked 2 jobs to keep him clothed and fed, who had told him he was destined for greatness. That same woman was tormenting his wife. The wife is carrying his child. He scrubbed his hands over his face, replaying the footage again, searching for some other explanation. But every frame screamed the same truth. Margaret Carrington, his revered mother, was the source of Layla's bruises. By the time he left the security office, Michael's soul felt splintered. Back at the mansion, Layla avoided his gaze all day. She moved carefully, as though afraid to bump into invisible walls. Margaret, on the other hand, carried herself as she always did, poised, commanding, untouchable. She kissed Michael's cheek at dinner, asked him about his meetings, and discussed charity galas as though nothing were wrong. The duality made him sick. Later that night, he sat alone in his study. A storm battered the windows, wind howling like an omen. He poured himself whiskey but barely touched it, his mind churning. If he confronted Margaret without proof, she'd twist it, like she always did. She would make him doubt what he'd seen, paint Layla as fragile, weak, unfit to bear the Carrington name. But if he stayed silent, Layla would keep suffering. His hand clenched around the glass until it nearly shattered. Michael knew what he had to do. He had to trap his mother in her own cruelty. He had to catch her with evidence no one could deny. The storm outside cracked thunder across the sky, as if echoing the storm inside him. For the first time in his life, Michael realized the most brutal battle he would ever face wasn't against business rivals or hostile investors. It would be against his own blood. Michael didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Layla's bruised face, his mother's hand gripping her chin, the look of quiet terror in his wife's eyes. By dawn, he had a plan. He called his most trusted employee, Daniel, a quiet, loyal man who had worked security for the Carrington Group for over a decade. Daniel had once taken a bullet while protecting Michael during a corporate ambush overseas. If there was anyone Michael could trust, it was him. "I need discreet surveillance," Michael said over the phone. "Not the kind we already have. Something closer, personal, audio included." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, if I may, you already have cameras everywhere." "Not enough," Michael cut him off, his voice sharp, then softer. "Daniel, this is about my wife and my child." That ended the discussion. Within hours, Daniel arrived at the mansion with micro-recorders, tiny cameras disguised as smoke detectors, even a voice-activated device small enough to hide inside a vase. Michael installed them himself, each movement heavy with dread. He placed one in the nursery, another in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, and the most important one in the sunroom, the place Margaret loved to sip her tea every afternoon with Layla. By noon, everything was ready. Now came the waiting. That afternoon, Michael pretended to leave for a meeting. He kissed Layla on the forehead, whispered, "Trust me," and drove off in his car. But instead of heading downtown, he circled back and parked on a secluded road behind the estate. From his phone, he accessed the live feeds. On screen, he saw Margaret summon Layla to the sunroom. Layla hesitated at the door, shoulders drawn tight, then stepped inside with a tray of tea. Michael's fists clenched as the exchange began. For the first time, he could hear it. "You think wearing my son's ring makes you worthy of this family?" Margaret's voice was laced with venom. Layla's reply was faint. "I never wanted your wealth. I only wanted silence." Margaret slammed her teacup onto the table. "Girls like you don't belong here. You'll poison his legacy with your weakness." Michael's jaw tightened. The words cut deep, even through a screen. "Please," Layla's voice cracked. "The baby? Your child will never be a Carrington." The sound of a slap cracked through the speakers. Layla stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the table. The tray clattered, porcelain shattering across the marble floor. Michael's vision blurred with rage. He wanted to storm in right then, but he forced himself to stay put. Not yet. He needed the recording. Through the screen, He saw Layla straighten, her hand on her swollen belly, tears burning down her cheeks. Yet in her eyes, something shifted. Courage, she whispered, barely audible. One day, he'll see you for what you are. Margaret froze, then laughed, a cold, brittle laugh. My son will never believe you, but Michael did. Sitting in his car, every word seared into him like fire. That evening, when Margaret left for her weekly charity dinner, Michael returned home. He found Layla in the bedroom, her face pale but her eyes still glowing with that flicker of courage. He knelt before her. I heard everything. She shook her head, fear flooding back. If you confront her, she'll deny it. She'll turn it on me. She always does. Michael took her hands in his. Not this time. This time she'll trap herself. Layla's lips trembled, but she nodded. For the first time in weeks, relief glimmered through her tears. Michael pulled her close, vowing silently, I will end this. No matter what it costs me. Outside, the storm had passed. But inside the Carrington estate, a darker storm was only beginning to rise. The Whitman estate had never felt smaller. Every corridor, every polished surface seemed to carry secrets now. Aisha moved through the house like a shadow, her steps quiet, her voice softer than ever. The bruises had faded slightly, but the fear in her eyes remained fresh, alive, and sharp as glass. Michael studied her closely during dinner, his fork untouched. Aisha's hands trembled as she poured water into his glass, careful not to spill. Margaret sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, pearls gleaming under the chandelier. Her gaze swept over Aisha with that same quiet disdain that had once gone unnoticed. But tonight, Michael noticed everything. Aisha, Margaret said, cutting into her steak with deliberate force, I do hope you're eating properly. That child you're carrying deserves strength. Aisha lowered her head, murmuring a polite yes. The silence almost swallowed her voice. Michael's grip on his napkin tightened until the fabric bunched in his fist. The cameras had caught enough. But he needed Margaret to reveal herself in real time. Without his prompting, without him being accused of twisting the truth. He had rehearsed it in his mind all day. Calm, patient, strategic. That night, after Aisha retired early, Michael walked his mother to the grand staircase. Margaret placed her hand lightly on the banister, her rings catching the light. You seem restless, Michael, she observed, her tone syrupy but edged with suspicion. I've had a lot on my mind, he admitted, choosing his words carefully. Business troubles? She tilted her head, studying him like a hawk. No, he said firmly. Family. Margaret's lips curled faintly, almost a smile. Family can be complicated, especially when outsiders think they belong at our table. The words burned in his ears, but Michael kept his expression neutral. He kissed her cheek goodnight, forcing a calmness he didn't feel. But as soon as she disappeared into her wing of the house, Michael slipped into his study. The security feeds blinked across the monitor, black and white squares glowing in the dark. He fast-forwarded to earlier that afternoon. His stomach knotted as the scene unfolded again, Margaret stepping into the nursery, her voice sharp even without sound. She shoved Aisha against the wall with a single motion, and Aisha's face crumpled as she tried to shield her belly. Michael leaned closer to the screen, jaw tight, fists trembling on the desk. It was no longer just disapproval. It wasn't kind, intentional, and dangerous. The following day, Michael staged his absence. He left in the morning as usual, kissed Aisha's forehead, and whispered, "Trust me, today changes everything." She gave him a puzzled look, but the weariness in her eyes told him she didn't have the strength to ask. Michael's car rolled down the long driveway, staff watching him leave. But just around the corner, beneath an overhanging oak, he parked, tablet in hand, every camera feed already streaming live. Hours crawled by. The estate appeared calm. Gardeners clipping hedges, maids dusting antiques, the chef preparing lunch. Normalcy draped itself across the estate like a disguise until Margaret's silver sedan pulled up. She stepped out elegantly, as if she owned not just the house but the world itself. Her heels clicked sharply across the marble floor as she let herself in with her private key. On Michael's tablet, the images shifted. Kitchen feed. Aisha stood at the counter, pouring tea, her posture tense the moment Margaret entered. The confrontation began with small gestures, words Michael couldn't hear. But the hostility in Margaret's body language grew by the second. A finger jabbed in Aisha's direction. A chair was shoved across the floor to block her path. Michael's pulse hammered as he watched. He muttered under his breath, "Just a little longer. Let it show." The feeds flickered. Margaret's face twisted with rage. She slammed her hand on the counter, making Aisha flinch. Then something worse. Margaret reached for the knife block. Michael's heart stopped. His hand hovered over the car door handle, ready to sprint inside. But he forced himself still, whispering, "Hold on, Aisha. Just a few more seconds. The world needs to see this." And as Margaret raised the blade, not yet striking, but threatening, Michael knew the silent war was about to erupt into something no one could ignore. The knife glinted under the kitchen lights, its edge catching the reflection of Margaret's cold eyes. Aisha staggered back, one hand clutching her belly, the other raised as if that alone could protect her. "Do you think," Margaret's voice sliced through the silence, sharp as steel, "that you can replace me? That this house, my son, is yours to keep?" Aisha's lips trembled. "Please." Not in front of the baby. Her voice was barely a whisper, broken and desperate. Michael couldn't watch any longer. The car door flew open with a slam, his footsteps pounding up the driveway. By the time he burst through the side entrance, his chest was heaving with fury. "Enough!" His voice thundered through the marble halls, echoing off every surface. Margaret froze, knife still in hand. Aisha gasped, tears spilling freely as she staggered toward Michael. He wrapped his arm around her instantly, shielding her with his body. "Mother," Michael said, his tone no longer trembling but hard, unshakable. "I've seen everything." Margaret's eyes darted around, calculating. For a split second, she tried to mask her actions with a laugh, a performance she had perfected over decades. "Michael, darling, you misunderstand. I was only—" "Stop!" His voice cut like a blade. "Every slap, every bruise, every word. It's all here." He lifted the tablet in his free hand. The security footage paused mid-frame. Margaret's hand raised, knife glinting above Aisha's head. Her mask cracked. Her lips parted, but no words came. "You poisoned this house," Michael continued, his voice low and steady, each word deliberate. "The shame? It isn't hers. It's yours." The knife slipped from Margaret's grip, clattering against the counter, ringing through the stillness like a bell tolling for the end of an era. Aisha buried her face against Michael's chest, trembling, whispering, "Don't let her near me again." "You'll never have to," Michael swore, pressing a kiss to her hair. A sound in the distance broke the silence. Sirens. Growing louder, blue and red lights flickered through the window panes. Margaret stiffened, her composure unraveling. "You called the police?" Michael's gaze was unflinching. "No, I gave them proof." Two officers entered the foyer moments later, their presence filling the estate with authority. Calm but firm, they moved toward Margaret. She raised her chin, still clinging to scraps of dignity. "This is a mistake," she hissed. "I am Margaret Whitman. Do you know who I am?" The officer didn't flinch. He held up the tablet Michael had provided earlier, copies of the footage already secured. "Yes, ma'am. And that's exactly why we're here." As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, Margaret's legacy shattered under the weight of reality. Outside, neighbors gathered at the gates, whispering as the once untouchable matriarch was escorted into the flashing lights. The Whitman family name, once a symbol of prestige, now carried the stain of scandal. Michael didn't look at them. His focus was only on Aisha, on the way her trembling began to ease as she clung to him. "You're safe now," he whispered, voice cracking with emotion. "I promise you, you're safe." And for the first time in weeks, Aisha allowed herself to believe it. The Whitman estate was no longer a fortress. By morning, it had become a headline. News vans crowded the gates, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters pressed microphones through the bars, calling out questions that echoed across the lawn. "Michael, is it true your mother attacked your wife? Aisha, how long has the abuse been going on? Will the Whitman empire survive this scandal?" Michael ignored them all. His priority wasn't the cameras outside. It was the fragile woman beside him. Aisha hadn't slept. Her hands shook as she folded and refolded the same handkerchief, her gaze unfocused. Every shadow seemed to make her flinch. Every knock at the door made her heart race. Michael knelt in front of her, his voice steady but soft. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. She can't touch you. Not ever again." Her eyes brimmed with tears, her voice trembling. "But the world will think I destroyed your family." He took her hands and kissed them gently. "You didn't destroy anything. She destroyed herself. You saved us." For the first time, Aisha let out a shaky breath that wasn't entirely fear. it carried a spark of relief. Meanwhile, Margaret's fall was swift. The footage dominated every news cycle. Clips played on repeat across networks and social media. The slap, the shove, the moment her hand reached for the knife. Commentators who once praised her now condemned her, their voices sharp with outrage. Behind closed doors, the truth finally comes out, one anchor declared. Power and money can hide many sins, but not forever. At the courthouse, Margaret stood in immaculate clothing, her pearls gleaming. But no jewelry could shield her from the judgment of the public. Protesters lined the steps, chanting for justice. Inside, lawyers scrambled to soften the charges, painting her as misunderstood, stressed, or even concerned for her son's welfare. But the evidence was undeniable. The recordings cut through every excuse like a blade. For Michael, the most challenging part wasn't the scandal. It was facing his own reflection. In the quiet hours of the night, while Aisha slept fitfully beside him, he stared at the ceiling, replaying everything. How had he missed the signs? How had he allowed his own mother to become a threat inside his home? The guilt weighed heavily. But each time Aisha stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name, he reminded himself he hadn't failed. He had seen the truth in time. He had chosen his wife, his child, and his own integrity over a poisoned legacy. Days later, when the media frenzy dulled, Michael and Aisha stood together in the nursery. Sunlight spilled across the freshly painted walls. The crib stood ready, soft blankets folded neatly. Aisha placed his hand on her belly, where their child stirred with gentle kicks. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not entirely, not yet, but enough. "This house feels different now," she whispered. Michael nodded, tightening his arm around her. "Because it's ours. Not hers, ours." And in that moment, the Whitman estate stopped being a battlefield. It became a home again. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the Whitman estate began to breathe again. The whispers at the gates faded. The cameras are left. Neighbors, once curious, grew silent when they saw Michael walking the gardens with Aisha, his hand always steady at her back, his presence unshakable. Margaret's name was no longer spoken with reverence. Court documents replaced charity galas. Headlines that once praised her power now chronicled her downfall. But inside the estate, none of that mattered. The real story was unfolding in the nursery. One crisp autumn morning, sunlight poured across the crib where their newborn daughter slept. Her tiny breaths filled the silence, her small fists curling and uncurling as if she already knew the world had been fought for her. Michael stood beside Aisha, their shoulders touching. He gazed down at the child, his heart swelling in a way no empire had ever managed to stir. "She'll never know that kind of cruelty," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not while I live." Aisha leaned against him, tears shining, not of fear this time, but of gratitude, of love. "Because you chose us," she said softly, and he had. He had chosen love over legacy, truth over silence, and family over the shadow of blood ties. In a quiet moment, Michael walked alone through the halls. He paused at a framed portrait of his parents, once hung proudly at the heart of the estate. He studied it for a long time, then removed it from the wall. In its place, he hung a new photo, Aisha holding their daughter, both smiling, bathed in sunlight. This was his legacy now. Not wealth, not power, not the Whitman name, but love, chosen, protected, and alive. And for the first time in his life, Michael Whitman felt truly free.